is really important and timely because it has been removed from the banking crisis, removed from our world, but it's not. It is France and Israel. Tina Fordham joins us now, founder, geopolitical strategist, Fordham Global Foresight. Tina, I have been dying to talk to you about this. I understand in France, and I want to get to that in a minute, you know, the Sixth Republic and what Mr. Macron's going to do. But the images from Israel over the weekend were stunning. I interpolated the extrapolation. Tina, it's as if 22 million people were protesting in America. Who are these people, Tina Fordham?
Thanks, Tom. And I wish I could hear more about Gilligan's Island and if the professor and Marianne were there too. I like the beard. Yes, big protests over the weekend. We're back to a period of Vox Populi risk, flames. My outlook this year is called firewalking. But as you say, markets have been very much focused on the crises in the banking sector, what it means for Fed policy. And the reason to take a look at these protests from a financial markets standpoint is whether or not there are transmission mechanisms and what's behind them. And I think one of the things that market participants tend to not be very good at is understanding the root causes and the interlinkages between these things. So you ask, who are the protesters in Israel, a tiny country in which a huge proportion of the population is not only protesting, but going on a national strike today in light of what is called a judicial coup. Bibi Netanyahu's proposed reforms amount to the executive branch of government neutralizing the judiciary, as if Congress could overtake the Supreme Court. You have like with all big protests, you've got segments of the Israeli population coming together. If it was one group, then it would be a flash in the pan. The staying power here is that secular Israelis, as well as the defense sort of reservists, as well as the defense minister himself, who was sacked last night, urban types, let's say, the tech sector, which is the driver of the Israeli tiger economy, are coming together to say, no, this is anti-democratic. And so it is really quite existential for a country that is often referred to as the only true democracy in the Middle East. And we haven't thought about Israel for quite a long time.
Well, there's the point, Tina. And my demarcation of my life is not Sadat and the rest. It is the assassination of Rabin in 1995. That is my demarcation between the old Israel of our childhoods and the new Israel. Are we at another demarcation point like we were with that assassination 30-some years ago?
I think so, unless Netanyahu and his supporters do more than pause, which is the easiest thing to do, and actually climb down. I don't think Israeli society is going to tolerate these so-called reforms. People have fought too hard, and the state of Israel means too much.
We've been seeing not only protests in Israel, but also in France, and of a different nature. They're sort of more populist in nature, but there feels like there are these fissures that are emerging in some of the stalwart democracies of the world as people try to understand the correct path forward, whether it's what's going on in Israel and undermining the judiciary, or if it's in France, where people are protesting the increase in the retirement age and wages. How much do you see this percolating into something larger that perhaps could affect markets, that could affect what we understand in terms of alliances, as well as just the wage pressures that are emerging?
It's a really important question, Lisa. And the French protests, I mean, you know, the sort of American stereotype was always the French don't want to work. Raising the retirement age from 62 to 64 is something that Emmanuel Macron campaigned upon because, as we all know, we are living in graying and kind of shrinking economies where there aren't enough workers in the demographic pyramid. But it isn't just the sort of the requirement to work longer that's getting the French out in the streets. If we want to try to connect it to this wider kind of Vox Populi resurgence, it's also the fact that Macron is resented for being perceived to ram this change through and to do it without wider support in the French Parliament. What is at stake here is, in my view, if we kind of link it back to the wobble that we had here in the UK, which wasn't about protests, but also involved the pension sector, is the extent to which taking away fundamental rights or a public perception that that's happening, particularly when it comes to pensions, is an electrified third rail. And so with that in mind, I take issue a bit with your previous speaker, although I know what he meant when he said markets are reacting with fear and panic and not fundamentals. Pensions and constitutional rights are fundamentals. They're political fundamentals. Our task is try to understand when they feed into markets.
Tina Fordham of Fordham Global Foresight, thank you so much for being with us. It's an important moment, especially given all of the tensions that we see. And it's not just what we're seeing with respect to traditional democracies and the interconnectedness of, kind of what we've seen in the wage pressures to some of the fissures that we've seen in traditional democracies. But there's this sort of existential overhang of what's been going on with Ukraine as well.
Yeah, what's so important here, and this is really, really something we're going to